In a bathtub, John awakens and discovers he has no memory of who he is. He looks at his reflection in the mirror and notices a wound on his forehead. After dressing in clothes he finds nearby, he searches the room for clues. John comes across a set of keys and a briefcase marked with the initials KH. Inside, he finds more clothes and a postcard of Shell Beach, which stirs faint childhood memories of visiting the place. Suddenly, a phone starts ringing, and John answers it. The caller is Dr. Daniel, who explains that John's memory was wiped due to a failed experiment and warns him that some men are after him. Daniel urges John to leave immediately. Before John can ask more, he hangs up after spotting something behind the bed. Upon investigating, he is horrified to find a dead woman with spiral-shaped scars on her body and a blood-stained knife on the table nearby. Panicked, John runs out of the room and realizes he is in a hotel. As the elevator doors open, he sees a group of pale, eerie figures, known as the Strangers. John flees down the stairs. Reaching the lobby, he notices that everyone is asleep, including the receptionist and a woman on the phone. The woman collapses as if lifeless when he opens the door. At that moment, the clock strikes midnight, and everyone suddenly wakes up, oblivious to their prior slumber. The receptionist addresses John by name and mentions he has paid for 3 weeks, but will need more money to continue his stay. John quickly glances at the reservation book to confirm his name and address before leaving the hotel without paying. He tosses the suitcase into the river as he walks through the city streets. Noticing the spirals on his fingertips, he grows increasingly unsettled. Back at the hotel, the receptionist enters John's room to clean it, only to be confronted by the Strangers. They push him against the wall and examine a syringe they find on the ground. When the receptionist informs them that John left, one of the Strangers touches his face, putting him to sleep. Meanwhile, Emma, John's wife, performs as a singer in a bar. After her set, a co-worker hands her a card left by a man claiming to be her husband's doctor. Emma visits the address on the card and meets Dr. Daniel, who is conducting experiments with a rat in a maze. Daniel informs Emma that John is suffering from a psychotic break, complete memory loss, and may be dangerous. He predicts John will contact her soon and asks her to inform him immediately if that happens. Meanwhile, Inspector Frank and several officers investigate the murder at the hotel. They reveal it is the 6th victim with spiral scars in a month, and John becomes the prime suspect. Detective Eddie tries to join the investigation, but is dismissed by the team because of his wild claims about mysterious beings watching them. At the station, Frank reviews fingerprint results and notices they are spiral patterns. Just then, Emma arrives to report her husband missing, and Frank reluctantly informs her that John might be a murderer. Elsewhere, John enters a familiar-looking restaurant, where the server immediately recognizes him as the man who recently left his wallet there. The server retrieves the wallet from one of the food windows, but John cannot figure out how to open it. As 2 police officers enter, John panics and somehow uses a strange power to break the window open. After retrieving his wallet, he tries to leave but is stopped by the officers. At that moment, a woman named May steps in, claiming John is with her. The officers let them go, and May takes John to her apartment. While May changes, John examines his wallet and finds a picture of Emma. He realizes May is a prostitute, but before he can react, he notices her young daughter and decides to leave. As he roams the streets, he comes across a sign advertising Shell Beach, matching the postcard in his briefcase. While inspecting the sign, he finds newspaper clippings in his pocket that detail the murders. John collapses in shock, realizing he is the one responsible for the killings. At that moment, the Strangers arrive and attempt to use their hand trick to put John to sleep, but it doesn't work on him. One stranger pulls out a knife and tries to attack, but the wooden platform beneath him collapses, causing him to fall. The other Strangers, also armed, provoke John's power, which further damages the platform. Another stranger loses his footing and gets tangled in a rope that ends up strangling him. The first stranger flies back onto the platform and tries again with his knife, but John steps aside and falls into the hole. Grabbing onto the rope, John's weight affects the sign's gears, causing part of it to collapse, and fatally wound the stranger by cutting his head. The loud noise causes the last stranger unbearable pain. When John climbs back up, he sees a slimy creature emerge from the dead stranger, and its dying screams shatter the nearby lights. Using the distraction, John quickly escapes. Later, at the stranger's hideout, they discuss John's unusual power. They mention he can tune and that their process of imprinting had failed. Frustrated that Daniel hasn't contacted them with updates, they decide to search for John themselves. Meanwhile, Emma steps out of the shower and is startled to see John waiting at the table. He doesn't remember her and explains that he came to this address because he saw it in the hotel book and the keys worked. Emma gives him Daniel's card and tells him John left after discovering she had an affair. John tells her he spent time with May but didn't have any violent thoughts, which makes him doubt he's the killer. When he looks out the window and notices a police car, he quickly runs away. Frank appears in the hallway to arrest him, but Emma distracts Frank, allowing John to jump to the lower floors and escape. Frank follows, leaping down after him, but John ends up in a room with no exit. Miraculously, a door appears on the wall, allowing John to leave the building. When Frank reaches the same room, the door is gone, but he finds Daniel's card on the floor. John later takes a cab and notices the driver has a Shell Beach souvenir. Curious, he asks how to get there, but the driver seems confused and unable to recall the beach's location, even though he insists he's been there many times. The cab drops John off at Daniel's building, where he observes Frank attempting to question the doctor. Daniel, however, gives no information. After Frank leaves, John secretly follows Daniel. Shortly after, Daniel is in a bathhouse when a stranger approaches him, showing him the syringe found in John's hotel room. Daniel explains that he tried to imprint John, but John woke up, knocked the syringe away, and escaped. Daniel assures the stranger that John has no memories, only fragmented glimpses. However, the stranger is concerned because John possesses the ability to tune, meaning he has the same power as the strangers. The stranger concludes they can no longer imprint John and need to capture him for another purpose. As they speak, John secretly listens in and observes everything. He checks Daniel's suitcase and notices the syringes inside. As John sneaks out, the stranger manipulates the location of the pool ladder, forcing Daniel to swim further. Meanwhile, Frank visits Eddie, who is obsessively drawing spirals on the walls. Eddie, having lost his sanity after working on a bizarre case, now spends his days riding the subway in endless circles. Eddie claims he thinks in circles and insists there's no way out. He talks about memory problems and expresses doubt about the identities of those around him, including his wife. When Frank presses him about the case, Eddie becomes hysterical, insisting there was never a case and that it's all a cruel joke. Moments later, John observes Daniel approaching an old building. A door materializes for the doctor to enter, but John cannot follow him further. Inside, the strangers are cataloging various objects, while Daniel uses them to create a serum that manipulates memories. Suddenly, the strangers make him float and demand an explanation for why John wasn't asleep at the hotel. Daniel admits he doesn't know, but theorizes that John is adapting and evolving. Daniel attributes this to the human soul, which the strangers are desperately searching for. As midnight approaches, all the strangers gather at the center of their hideout, waiting for their enormous clock to strike 12. When it does, every person in the city instantly falls asleep, and all machinery, including cars and clocks, stops functioning. John remains awake and panics when he notices the world frozen around him. He tries to wake others, but no one responds. Meanwhile, in their headquarters, the strangers declare it's time to tune. They activate a machine that causes massive structures to rise from the ground across the city. John then sees the strangers and Daniel emerge from the hideout carrying sleeping humans, who are placed in various buildings and injected with a serum in their foreheads. The rooms in these buildings transform after the injections, creating new lives for the inhabitants. Some people become wealthier, others receive new jobs, and even children are affected. Once Daniel finishes, John confronts him, shaking him violently and demanding answers. When Daniel refuses to explain, John becomes enraged, unintentionally activating his powers and sending Daniel flying. Impressed, Daniel tells John he possesses tuning, the same ability the strangers use to manipulate buildings. He offers to help John control it, but the strangers arrive, forcing John to flee. Back at headquarters, the clock is put away, and the city awakens. The people who were injected now believe the implanted memories are their real lives. As Frank wakes up, he notices a spiral in his coffee that resembles John's fingerprint. The following night, Daniel develops a new serum containing John's memories, designed to help the strangers track him. Mr. Hand volunteers to test it and is strapped to a device as Daniel administers the serum. Hand's body convulses, as his mind is flooded with John's entire life memories, but he survives and is prepared to hunt John down. Later, the strangers float through the city and break into May's house, threatening her with a knife to extract information about John. Meanwhile, John examines the back of the postcard and sees it signed by Carl Harris, whose initials match those on the suitcase. He looks up Carl's name in the yellow pages, finds an address, and gets directions from a newspaper stand before taking the subway. During the ride, John spots Shell Beach on the subway map and immediately switches lines to reach it. However, no matter which train he takes, he cannot find a way to the outer stations. Nearby, Eddie overhears John talking to a guard and points out that leaving the city is impossible, a conclusion Eddie reached after trying himself. Eddie explains he used to be a cop, but discovered that the strangers frequently swap people's memories and professions without their awareness. Eddie remembers because he woke up in the middle of the process, much like John. He then declares he's found a way out. John is horrified to see Eddie fatally hit by a train moments later. Meanwhile, the strangers follow John's trail to Emma's home. Mr. Hand finds Emma watching the river, and they engage in a philosophical discussion about how memories shape human identity. After experiencing more of John's memories with Emma, Hand departs. Remembering John's story, Emma visits May's apartment and finds her dead with spiral scars. As Emma is about to flee, she is caught by Frank, who now suspects her involvement. They soon discover May's daughter hiding under the bed with a drawing depicting the stranger's arrival. Eventually, John reaches Carl's address, which turns out to be an aquarium. When no one answers his calls, John breaks a front window to enter. Inside a dark room, he is confronted by Carl, who lowers his weapon upon recognizing John. Carl reveals himself as John's uncle and shows him numerous photos of his childhood, including ones of Shell Beach. John's family perished when their house burned down, but Carl can't recall how to get to that place. While looking at the photos, John notices they are brightly lit and realizes the sun has never risen in this city. It's always night. One of the photos shows John with a burn scar on his arm from the fire, yet he has no scar now, proving everything is a lie. Despite this, John decides to stay the night in his old room, where he finds a childhood journal about Shell Beach. However, the journal is blank. Meanwhile, Carl secretly contacts Emma to tell her where John is, but John overhears the call and escapes through the window. Emma shares the information with Frank, and the two set out to find John, unaware that Mr. Hand is trailing them. As midnight strikes, everyone in the city falls asleep. The strangers locate John and start altering the staircase he's on to trap him. John keeps running, climbing to the roof and leaping from one building to another as the city shifts around him. Suddenly, Mr. Hand intercepts him and attacks, but John punches him, knocking him down, and seizes his knife. John uses the knife to threaten Hand and forces him to talk. Hand reveals that the strangers constructed this city by using stolen memories from people across various time periods. Each night, they modify the city in an attempt to understand what makes humans unique, as the strangers aspire to be like them. Hand further taunts John with fragments of his memories, before revealing that the strangers are the gooey creatures John encountered earlier, using deceased human bodies as vessels. Hand tries to strangle John, but the roof suddenly transforms, causing them both to fall. John grabs onto a balcony as more strangers pursue him, with a building rapidly closing in. Desperate, John shatters a window and hides inside before the two buildings collide, killing one of the strangers. Another stranger follows John inside and chases him through the corridors. John runs until he reaches a door, which he struggles to open. When he finally gets it open, he nearly falls off the building. Clinging to the edge, he is bitten on the hand by the stranger, causing him to bleed. Fortunately, a nearby structure begins forming, allowing John to jump onto it and escape across the rooftops once again. As the tuning session concludes and the city awakens, John lands in an alley where strangers surround him. However, Frank and Emma arrive in a car just in time to rescue him. Later, at the police station, Frank interrogates John, showing him photos of the victims and the Shell Beach journal. To John's astonishment, the previously blank pages now contain drawings. John points out the perpetual darkness and the lack of genuine memories among the people, arguing that something is deeply wrong, but Frank remains skeptical. To convince him, John uses his powers to levitate the book, leaving Frank in disbelief. Afterward, John speaks with Emma and tells her he's no longer upset about her affair because their memories aren't real. He adds that their marriage isn't real either, but Emma insists that her feelings for him are genuine. John uses his powers to shatter the glass and kisses her, but the police take him into custody. Suddenly, the strangers burst into the station, putting all the officers to sleep. They force the captain to lead them to John, but when they open the cell, he's already gone. Enraged, Hand kills the captain. At the bathhouse, John confronts Daniel again, forcing him to talk. Daniel reveals that the entire city is an experiment created by the strangers. He hides there because the strangers are afraid of water. Daniel also confirms that John isn't a murderer and offers to inject him with a serum to reveal the rest of the truth. Just then, Frank arrives, holding Daniel at gunpoint. Frank reveals he freed John so they could uncover the truth together. The pair forces Daniel into Frank's car and heads toward Shell Beach, demanding Daniel guide them. When Daniel refuses, claiming there's nothing there, John uses his powers to torture him until he complies. They reach the river, but find the bridge is missing. Daniel tries to escape, but John knocks him down, declaring they will continue by boat. Meanwhile, Emma returns to her apartment and finds all her belongings gone. The strangers are there, and Hand addresses her as Anna. Emma tries to flee, but Hand blocks her escape. Back on the boat, Daniel explains the truth. The strangers are aliens who abducted a group of humans and brought them to this perpetually dark city as part of an experiment. By mixing and rearranging human memories, the strangers hope to understand what makes humans unique and discover how to obtain a soul. The strangers share a collective consciousness, and their race is dying, believing human souls can save them. Their fear of light keeps the city in constant darkness. Daniel reveals he was forced to assist the aliens because they couldn't comprehend the human mind. He had to erase his own memories to cooperate. All of John's memories are fabricated, and the notebook drawings were created by John's powers. Eventually, they reach the city's outer walls and find that Shell Beach is nothing more than a sign. Despite Daniel's insistence that there's nothing beyond the city, Frank and John begin breaking through the wall. As the wall collapses, they almost fall through a hole, stunned to see outer space on the other side, confirming the alien's story. At that moment, the strangers arrive with Emma. Frank opens fire, killing a few of them. When one stranger attacks John, Frank fights it, and they both tumble through the hole, floating away into space to their deaths. John prepares to keep fighting, but Hand threatens Emma's life, forcing John to surrender. Hand puts him to sleep. John awakens, tied to a device in the strangers' hideout. The alien crowd demands his death, but their leader declares the experiment over and plans to imprint John with their collective memories to share his soul. Pretending to comply, Daniel instead injects John with memories, teaching him to master his powers and fully control tuning. John awakens and destroys the device with his mind. He uses his powers to repel the strangers and free Daniel. The leader retaliates, and a fierce battle ensues between John and the stranger. Their powers collide, tearing apart the room and sending the other strangers into a panic. Metal spikes rise, structures grow, and electricity surges, striking the strangers. The room quakes, and debris crushes many of them. As the building collapses, the remaining strangers are flung into space. The battle climaxes as John's and the leader's powers clash, releasing a massive beam of light. The city above begins to crumble. Daniel escapes as a giant clock emerges from the ground, and John floats skyward. The leader follows, throwing a knife at John. John halts it mid-air with his powers and sends it back, impaling the leader. The leader falls into a water tank, which explodes. The alien escapes the dead body and dissolves into the air. Afterward, John asks about Emma. Daniel explains she no longer exists, as her memories were rewritten during the last tuning. With the memory factory destroyed, they can't restore her. John uses his powers to expel the water from the city, creating an ocean around it. He begins reconstructing the city and declares his intention to reach Shell Beach. Emma, now Anna, wakes up as a theater employee. After her shift, she boards a bus heading to Shell Beach. Meanwhile, John encounters Hand, but ignores him. He creates a shore by the ocean and makes the sun rise for the first time. The sunlight burns Hand. John walks to a bridge at the shore, where he reunites with Emma. Though she doesn't recognize him, she invites him for a walk on the beach.